Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
What brings you to World Water Week 2016?
Well, I love coming to World Water Week. I love Stockholm. It's one of my favorite cities on the planet. And this is a great gathering of, thousands of really, really smart people working on really important issues all over the world. So it's a very convenient place to connect with old friends and colleagues and also learn a lot at the same time.
So you've just published a report.
Yes.
What's the overview?
So the overview is, this report really emphasized documenting where water shortages are occurring around the world, why they're occurring, our analysis, our assessment of that, and what happens when people run out of water. When we no longer have enough water to generate electricity, when we no longer have enough water to grow our food. Many cities experiencing drinking water supply shortages. So we documented that as best we could. And then importantly, our report then pivots and says, okay, so what are we going to do about that? And largely tries to make the case that the way that we have traditionally approached that problem isn't going to work so well in the future. Because in the past, we always just tried to bolster our supply. Water scarcity or water shortage is basically a supply and demand problem. But we always emphasize the supply part in our solutions. So we built big reservoirs, we built big pipelines and moved water from great distances. We built desalination plants to take the salt out of ocean water. For various reasons, those options are not very attractive in the 21st century. They're really expensive. They cause a lot of environmental damage. And we're going to have a lot less water available to us in the future as the climate is changing in many of these water scarce regions. So we have to rethink this problem. We have to come up with new solutions.
What is the solution?
Well, we think one that's not been given enough attention and that we really think has a tremendous amount of potential is enabling the community of people using a particular water source to share the water better, to trade the water, the rights to use the water among themselves. And to do that in the context of what's commonly referred to as a water market. And a water market's not unlike, a farmer's market, where you go and you buy food, buy goods from various people who are interested in selling it to you. Same with a water market. Basically, a water market is based on the concept that the people who are selling hold water rights, entitlements to use a certain volume of water in each year, and if they no longer need the full entitlement of their rights, then they can make some of their water available out in the market, and people who need more water can access it that way.
Is that the catalyst for impact investment?
Yes, so we're a nature conservation organization. Our interest in all of this is the fact that in these water scarce, water short areas of the world, they've used up all the water. There's no more water left in the natural environment. And so we want to figure out some way to take care of that problem. So historically, our organization has utilized water markets as a way to access more water for the environment, but we've done that using philanthropic contributions and in some cases government grants. Those were our funding sources to do this work. But there was never enough. And to get the volumes of water back to nature requires a lot more financial resources than we were able to access in those other ways through philanthropy and government grants. And so we started thinking a few years ago about the potential for tapping into the investor community and using investment funds as a source of funding to enable us to acquire water rights for the environment.
And how did that go?
So far it's going quite well. The real challenge is, it's investor money, so the investors aren't giving you the money for free. They're going to want some return on their investment. So you have to be very clever. You have to be very creative and innovative about how are you going to use some of the water rights that you're acquiring and generate some revenue from it. And we do that in a couple of ways. The simplest way to understand, though, is just renting some of our water. When you get into a dry period and there's a lot of people that are needing more water, then we have some water rights that we can make available to some of those folks and generate some revenue with that. At the same time, if you're holding a water right that has monetary value, and if it's becoming a more scarce or more precious resource over time, then that value increases over time, and that's another way that we can capture some value and some return back to our investors. is by trading our water rights over time. So like many markets, there are times when the value of a water right goes up during times of scarcity, during droughts, for example, and there are times when the value of a water right will go down. There's abundant water, it's been raining like crazy, you know, the price goes down on it. So as with any other markets, we're trying to buy low and sell high, but doing it on behalf of nature.
Is there not a risk that at some point it becomes commoditized? Once
water is being allocated using a system like a water rights system, a water permitting system, if you're able to trade it, then in essence it is a commodity, you know, just almost by definition. So there are many places who have water rights systems but don't allow people to trade it. In many ways that's something of a disadvantage, because then people who have more water than they might need have no incentive to share it with others. Whereas if the water does take on a value, a financial, a monetary value, then a water rights holder has a very strong incentive that if they can use less water, if they no longer need the full volume of their entitlement, they can make some portion of their water rights available for other people and receive financial compensation for doing so. So a water market has a lot of attractive aspects to it, particularly by driving efficiency and better use of the water overall.
So it's a win-win.
We think it's a win-win. Now, that's not to say that there's not pitfalls and unintended consequences. And we're very adamant about the need for very strong governance systems to be in place to protect against those unintended consequences. For example, you don't want to have a sector of society that's, you know, the poor sector of society, all of a sudden having trouble accessing enough water for their basic needs, for their subsistence uses and that sort of thing. There are ways to protect against that in the market. You can reserve some portion of the water from the market and make that available, you know, to meet basic human needs. Ideally, we would have done that for the environment as well, but there are, in essence, there are really no places around the planet where in the allocation of water to the users where they said, where they were thought ahead and said, you know, we might want to leave a little bit for nature. You know, there's a lot of values there, and we you know, like to use nature, we depend upon nature. It's important to keep it in a healthy condition, but unfortunately that wasn't taken into account.
Are there any working examples of this model?
There are some working examples. So there are existing water markets in a number of different countries around the world. The places where we have intervened in a water market and used investor funding to acquire our own water rights and then repurpose those water rights for nature and to make some water available for other users who are in need of more water. We've only done that in one place so far, in the Murray-Darling Basin in Australia, but we're in advanced stages of design of more of these projects in a handful of other places, particularly in Chile, other parts of Latin America, and in the Western United States. But we're also looking at some other places as well. We're looking at Spain as a possibility. We're looking at different parts of Africa. South Africa seems to be a possibility as well.
What next?
Well, you know, I really do think, we're really excited about this. We think that it's a way of addressing the water scarcity problem and addressing the shortcomings of water allocation systems to get some water back to nature and to get some water to underserved communities, to indigenous peoples and that sort of thing. So the social and the environmental benefits are quite significant. We can't deploy this strategy everywhere, however, because the enabling conditions, the right rules, regulations, governance around how water gets managed and the rules about how you can trade water, they aren't favorable for this kind of a strategy in too many places. So what we're doing is a twofold strategy. One, in the places that we can make this work, do it and start demonstrating it, get some projects on the ground, get them in operation and prove the principle. And then at the same time, trying to work on strengthening the enabling conditions in other places so that we can do this in a lot more other areas of the world.
And how are you looking to expand the size of these projects so you start meeting that need, that greater need?
Well, it's expanding both in terms of expanding the size of the operation in individual places. So in Australia, we started at about $25 million US, and we want to go to about $100 million in the next few years. I think the potential is to go even beyond that in the place where we started in Australia, in the Murray-Darling Basin. But then there's also just getting a lot more of these projects started up in a number of different places so that we have a portfolio of these projects taking place. We've also contemplated the idea of developing, presently we're funding these individual projects with their own investment funds. And one of the ideas that we're now toying with is, could we make a national fund so that we could do multiple projects within the same country, or could we even create a global investment fund where investors in different parts of the world could contribute into that, and that money would be then deployed to its best advantage in different countries, in different projects all over the world.
Exciting times.
Very exciting times. Well, we hope we can do a lot of good with it.
Ryan, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much for your time.